Yeah, that's what it would be for all of us. Well, maybe not all of us, but most of them.
You don't have a mailing address for Robert Haskins, do you?
Mm-hmm. I do.
I would love to send him a call.
I'll get it to you. Okay.
All right, chapter 41. We've moved our way up to chapter 41. And I'll just be honest with you. I don't think I can teach you much in this chapter. I mean, I have studied and I have studied and I have read every commentary I've got on it. And it's just like, every commentary I read just pretty much paraphrases it back to you. And I'm like, what good is that? I could do that. So, but I did learn a few things, and maybe it'll make it worth your time to come tonight or worth your time to watch. But again, like last week, beyond what we will read, what happens in this chapter, again, I think there is a great application in this chapter that we'll get to at the end. But the funny thing, one of the commentaries, it has that section at the end of each chapter, and it calls it homiletical suggestions. It gives you ideas. Some of them said, you can't even preach this one. About this one, he said, this chapter was way too long to teach it in one sitting. And yet here we go. We're going to do it. We're going to get it done. But as we left Joseph last time, he had just had a glimmer of hope. The cupbearer whose dream Joseph had interpreted had indeed been reinstated to Pharaoh. He was Pharaoh's chief cupbearer once again. And when Joseph interpreted the dream, he asked the cupbearer to remember me to Pharaoh. And although nothing is said, there's no record of the cupbearer's affirmation. Yes, I'll do that just as soon as I get back. There's no record of that. Still, we expected that that's what he was going to do because he was so excited about his reply or about his interpretation. But he didn't. But remember where Joseph was. He was in that part of the jail or the prison that was in the home, or at least connected to the house of the captain of the bodyguard. Now, who was that? Potiphar. I mean, that just amazes me. When I learned that, that's just amazing. Now, think about this. Potiphar, as we said last time, Potiphar likely knew that Joseph was innocent. But there wasn't anything he could do about it. So he put Joseph in a place where he could keep an eye on him. I just find that fascinating. Maybe he put him there so that he could pick his brain now and then. What I need to do about this or that. We don't know. We don't have any indication, any record that they actually conversed. But the fact that he's there.
It just might come in handy.
That's exactly right. It just might come in handy. So, but the 2 years passed. And perhaps Joseph felt betrayed again. At this point, Matthew Henry, in his commentary, made what I think was a powerful statement. At least it hit me that way. And he said that is Joseph, may have concluded that his best course of action would be to continue to let God take the initiative, since he had done so consistently in his life to that time. Just trust God to take the initiative. In other words, he would just wait for God to open doors as God had always done. And let me just throw this out here now. God is still in the door opening business. And that's all I'll say about that for right now. But as I was studying this, I was reminded of a line from the hymn Amazing Grace. It says, "'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." That seemed to be Joseph's mentality. If I'm going to be a servant, I'm going to be the best servant I can be. If I'm going to be a slave, I'm going to be the best slave I can be. And God will take care of the rest of it. So what I'm going to do is just going to jump right in. And if you have any comments or questions, just, stop me, because I can be like a freight train when I get going. But I'm just going to kind of read it, paraphrase it myself, but I'll share with you the things that I've learned. So it starts out with our old friend, and it came to pass. A period of time has passed, and it is now at the end of 2 full years. And now, my first inclination as I was reading it, I put an emphasis on the 2 full years, meaning it was exactly 2 years to the day after the cupbearer had been reinstated. Well, what was the occasion for the cupbearer to be reinstated? Do you remember? Birthday. Pharaoh's birthday. So my first thought was, must be Pharaoh's birthday again. So that was but that's not where this is going. I was wrong on that, but that was what I thought. The word used here for 2 full years, actually the word used for years here is the word for days. So what this is saying is, this is 2 full years of days. In other words, a lot of days have passed. Now, Moses is telling this from Joseph's viewpoint. It was a lot of days, 2 years worth of them, since the cupbearer promised to remember him to Pharaoh. And once I realized that, I got to wondering if Joseph was marking the days on the wall, like they do in the movies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know. But after 2 full years of days, and Joseph doesn't have any idea that anything is happening out of the ordinary when he gets up that morning. After 2 full years of days, Pharaoh had a dream. And again, this is where the King James Version is helpful in showing the impact of this dream. Now, my translation doesn't always show it. Whatever translation you're using may not show it. But listen and watch for the word behold. And even when behold is there, sometimes we see it so often that we just read over it and we don't realize that it's there. In fact, I was looking for behold as I was going down through here, and I was circling it every time I found it. And I'd find myself reading it and having to go back. Well, there's one I missed. Because you just read over it. It's just something that's there. So, behold is a very important word in Scripture. When you see the word behold, or in some translation in the New American Standard at times will say, and lo, when it should be, it's the word for behold. When you see that, it means stop and look. We talk about the Psalms, and there's that Selah. And everybody wants to know what Selah means. And so the best explanation that I've heard, it means stop and think about that, or take a rest here and look at what it's just said. But that's what behold is. It means stop and look at what is just being said. Joe's uncle was comical in that when he was telling something and he really wanted to make a point, he'd say, now listen. He would emphasize it, now listen. And that's what behold is here. So pay close attention. Verse 1. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. So you probably already know the Nile was a very sacred river. It was extremely important to the Egyptians. I didn't realize this, but Egypt actually got very little rainfall, but because of the rain and the snow in the northern area, the Nile would flood each year. And when it flooded, the water over the surrounding area, it would bring valuable nutrients to the land. And if you can have a garden, next to the river, it's just good. It draws it out of the ground. So they depended on the Nile for their food. And so in Pharaoh's dream, he's standing by the Nile. And that probably was nothing unusual. He probably had done that many times. But then, and behold, from the Nile, there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. And he probably thought, well, now that's nice. Those are really good-looking cows. They're fat, and they're just, we were talking about the pigs earlier. They're just growing and everything. 1,000 thoughts can go through your mind in just a few seconds. And so, I'm about to lose my place. So cattle to the Egyptian was the symbol of the goddess Isis, the goddess of the earth. And just kind of as a side note, and you probably already know this, but all the plagues in the book of Exodus are attached to one of Egypt's false gods, or gods or goddesses. They're directed at a god or a goddess in Egypt. Now, you may remember that the cattle in Egypt were killed by hailstones. Well, both weather and cattle would have been two of their gods. So, two for the price of one in one plague there. But anyway, Isis was the nourisher of the earth, the fertility goddess of the earth. And the cow represented the agricultural nourishment. So there they were, these good-looking cows, 7 of them, and they were eating by the banks of the Nile, the sacred river of Egypt. And he probably felt pretty good about it at that point. And then verses 3 and 4, then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile. You just can imagine them coming out of the Nile, ugly and gaunt or lean or skinny, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. For a moment, they were just standing there side by side. And then verse 4, and the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. And then Pharaoh awoke, and I thought, I bet he did. Sounds like some of the dreams I can have sometimes. But he fell back asleep, and this came to mind. I thought, well, maybe he turned over. My mother always told me that if you have a bad dream, if you'll turn over and go back to sleep, you'll forget it. Didn't work for Pharaoh, but that's what I was always told growing up, I guess, when I had nightmares. But he went back to sleep. Verse 5, and he fell asleep, and he dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, or your translation may say corn, but it's not corn like we think of stalks of ears of corn. It was a grain. 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. This was a type of grain that grew in Egypt, kind of like wheat, but with several heads of grain on one stalk. It was a very prosperous year for that. In fact, this grain still grows there today. This was exceptionally good to have 7 on one stalk. And again, for a split second, it stood there, probably waving in the breeze, amber waves of grain. And then, verse 6, then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. Now, I got kind of intrigued by something one of the commentaries said. I don't remember exactly what it was, but something about this east wind, and I got started doing a search and a study on that. It's all like 60-some times in the Old Testament. A lot of it in Ezekiel. The one that came to my mind was Jonah. At the end of Jonah, and the plant comes up, and then the east wind blows, and it withers down. But Ezekiel's filled with it. There's a lot of scripture in Ezekiel about it. But it's this vehement east wind. It's so hot, and it just burned it down. And this was so real. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream, but it was so real. He just couldn't get over how real it was. Now, the imagery in these 2 dreams isn't just random. It's just like, we'll just use cows and grain. No, the image of these 2 things is important. Cattle and grain represented the 2 sources of food. They didn't have a food pyramid like we might have. They basically 2 things on their food pyramid. The cattle and the grain, it represented crops and flocks, or meat and bread. And it represented the 2 sources of food for the surrounding nations as well. I didn't realize that. But Egypt, to use a modern term, was the breadbasket of the ancient world. Well, we know that Abraham went down there when there was a famine, because there would have still been food in Egypt. And Isaac was told, don't go down there when there was a famine. So there was seldom famines there like there were famines, but not like there were in other parts of the world. So it was the breadbasket of the world. So the two things that they depend on the most, all he can think is, this can't be good. But what does it mean? So verse 8, and it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. So he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men. Now, you may remember that one of the reasons, the two men that were in prison there with Joseph, one of the reasons they were so sad is because they couldn't get to an interpreter. We said last time, if they had not been in prison or in jail, they would have gone to the interpreters themselves, but they couldn't get to one in there. So these magicians and wise men these are two different groups of men. If you took the time to read about Daniel's, or if you remember Daniel's encounter with King Nebuchadnezzar, you may remember that Nebuchadnezzar called for, when he had the dream, and he wasn't going to tell it. Now, there are some commentaries that say he forgot it. I don't think he forgot it. I think he just wasn't going to tell it until they told it back to him. But he called for the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans. All four of these were different types of, we might say, wise men or sages. He called for four different types to interpret his dream. Now, when you and I hear the term magician, we think of Houdini or sleight of hand. I hate magic. I don't care. This guy used to know that did what he called Christian magic. Well, I don't care what you call it. I don't like it because I don't like to be fooled. And I just sleight of hand stuff. But that's what we think of. But that's not what this is. These were men who had studied the sacred writings and astrology all their lives. They were likely born into this line. They didn't just decide, I think I'll be an astrologer or I'll be a magician when I grow up. No, they were born into this. They were raised in this. Now, I'm not going to take the time to go into it, but when we studied Matthew, we did a deep dive into the Magi, who they were, where they were from, what they were called kingmakers, and why were they called that? So we really dug into that. But if you trace their line, starting in Daniel and tracing back through Scripture, they go all the way back to the Chaldeans. Now, you remember where Abraham is from? Ur of the Chaldees, or the Chaldeans. So I don't think these particular magicians came from Chaldea. I didn't take time to dig into that, but they were a similar type. These Chaldeans, there was the Medes. We remember the Medes and the Persians. Just to give you this quick thing, they had different tribes of Medes, just like the Hebrews had different tribes. We have the 12 tribes of Israel. They had different tribes. The tribe of Israel, that is the priestly line, is Aaron's tribe. Well, in the same way, they had a specific line that was their priestly line, and that's who these were. These were specific, set-aside men that were born into this. But the bottom line is, they couldn't do it. They could not interpret Pharaoh's dream, the rest of verse 8. So, and Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. It doesn't tell us how long they may have tried. Or, now repeat that again. Now, what color were the cows? Maybe they went into all kinds of details that were not given, but bottom line is they couldn't do it. So finally then, the cupbearer, who probably was standing off in the shadows somewhere watching all this take place, spoke up. And he said, then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses, or your translation say my sins or my faults. Now there are two ways of looking at that. Some of the commentaries said what he's talking about is the fact that he forgot to tell about Joseph. At least one of the other commentaries said it was referring to what got him thrown in prison to start with. I lean more toward the fact that he forgot Joseph. But he said, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Pharaoh was furious with his servants, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. And we had a dream on the same night. He and I, each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant telling us that he actually still belonged to Potiphar, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard. And we related to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one, he interpreted according to his own dream. And in verse 13, and it came to pass that just as he interpreted for us, so it happened he, the bodyguard, restored me to my office, and the bodyguard hanged the other men. So, okay, desperate times call for desperate measures. At this point, Pharaoh didn't care that Joseph was a Hebrew slave. He didn't care that he was a prisoner. All he wants is answers. So verse 14, then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon or out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. Now, I had always read this as Joseph, they were in a hurry to get him to Pharaoh. But this is my thinking. Joseph said, no, I've got to shave first and I've got to clean up. I'm not going for Pharaoh looking like this. But that's not how it was at all. I'd always read it as Joseph took the time to shave and change clothes, may even bathe. But at least one commentary said that several of the verbs used refer to what was ordered to be done. Clean him up, shave him, and then bring him before Pharaoh. And in a way that makes sense. I mean, after all, what would a prisoner be doing with a razor? I mean, when you think about it. And another thing jumped out at me as I was reading it again a while ago. They brought him out of the dungeon, and when he had shaved himself. So they brought him out of the dungeon to a place to clean up. And this, on the other hand, according to Herodotus, who's a Greek historian, he said the Egyptian had extreme care for cleanliness. And of course, Joseph would know that. I mean, he's lived with them now for 13 years. And so, as my translation put it, he shaved himself. So apparently, they brought him out of the dungeon, then they gave him the razor to clean up and to bathe and to put on clean clothes. But either way, whether he shaved himself or somebody else did, he cleaned up before he approached Pharaoh, even if Pharaoh was in a hurry. So verses 15 through 24 give us that. I mean, and you got any comments or questions? I don't know any other way to do this because it's just, as I told you, I said, it just is what it is.
Back in verse 12, maybe I missed it. He said, now a Hebrew youth was with us there. How old was Joseph at this time?
At this time, he's 30. At the time that he was there, it would have been 2 years earlier, so he would have been 28.
So they think a 28-year-old is a youth.
I do, don't you?
Given my age, yes, but I mean,
mine says a young Hebrew. It doesn't say youth. It just says young. So, you know, if you're 50, someone's 30.
Everybody's young.
Everybody's young. Yeah, exactly. Like we were saying earlier about elderly woman. Yeah, exactly.
30 years baby.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All of our kids are our babies, are they not? I don't care how old they are. All right, verses 15 through 24 give us that meeting. And so they bring him in, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I mean, there's no small talk or I mean, just cut to the chase. I've had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I've heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. What say you, basically?
I love this answer.
Huh?
I love this answer.
I love this answer too. And verse 16, and Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh, my translation says, a favorable answer. So other translations that I read, God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace or a true answer. What?
Mine says desires.
The answer he desires.
The answer he desires.
Set you at ease.
Set you at ease. Now, I think set you at ease is a better translation there because it's a true answer. It will be true whether you like it or not. Whether it's an answer you want to hear or not. Remember the one of the guys, the chief baker, he didn't get the answer he wanted to hear. So God will give the correct answer, the answer that is true, whether it's an answer you want to hear or not. So verse 17, so Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, and he apparently that satisfied him, and he went right into it. And notice the additional, I don't know if you noticed this if you were studying, the additional information he gives now. Before, as it was just relating the dreams, it was just the facts of the dream. But now he's sharing what he was feeling as he was having this dream. And so Pharaoh spoke to Joseph and said, in my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the marshland. All was well and good there. And behold, 7 other cows came up after them, and this is where he adds, poor and very ugly and gaunt. And then he adds, I've never seen cows this bad before, such as I'd never seen for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And there is nothing uglier than a skinny cow. I mean, just bones sticking out. I mean, they're horrible. And he said, it's the ugliest I've ever seen. And the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 cows. Yet, when they devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them. I mean, they didn't look like they'd eaten anything. They were just as ugly as before. And then I awoke. I also saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears full and good came up on a single stalk. And behold, 7 ears, apparently 1 each on each stalk, withered thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And then I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. So then Joseph begins to interpret the dream. And we read that and we're like, how could you miss it? How could you miss what this means? I mean, the bad eats up the good. But you got to remember, however old we are is probably how many times we've heard this story. I mean, you look like you had a thought there. I could see it brewing. Okay. But we've heard it so many times that it's very clear to us. It's like trying one of those, you try to find something in a picture and you can't find it, and where's Waldo? And once you find it, then how did you ever miss it? So now, so Joseph begins to interpret the dream. And perhaps God had blinded the magicians so that they couldn't understand it. So that they couldn't see the meaning, so that Joseph would be called for. So then Joseph begins in verse 25. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. And now here's the key. God has told to Pharaoh what he is about to do. God has told you what he's about, or as we say here in the South, what he's fixing to do. But notice that Joseph uses the name God. He doesn't use the name Jehovah. He doesn't use Lord. Like we read back in chapter 39. Pharaoh would not have known Jehovah or the Lord. But he did understand God. He may have not understood Joseph's God, but he understood God. But in giving Pharaoh this 2-part dream and showing him that everything would be affected, God is being merciful. God is showing his merciful kindness. God could have just done it without saying a word to anybody. And likely, if they had had anything at all, or Joseph's family may have come down just trying to find something. But God didn't have to do that. He didn't have to give a warning. And actually, there are two merciful kindnesses here. One to Pharaoh, to be able to prepare, and one to Joseph. And then as I thought about it, actually there's three. There's one to Joseph's family who are up there in Hebron. They didn't have a clue this was about to happen. They had no clue that after 7 years there was going to be a famine. So verses 26 through 31. So he begins to interpret the dream. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. It's all the same picture that it's teaching. And the 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are also 7 years. And the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. So think about how that fell on, no pun intended, how it fell on their ears. There's going to be 7 years of famine. And notice, they're told there's going to be 7 years of famine before they're told there's going to be 7 years of prosperity. That just now hit me. I didn't pick up on that as I read it. So verse 28, it is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. This is a fact. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. He repeats that. He just said that to him. God has told Pharaoh what he's about to do. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. And then he says in verse 29, behold, 7 years of great abundance. Great, you couldn't use enough superlatives here. 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt. And verse 30, and after them, then 7 years of famine will come. And all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine will ravage. It will destroy the land. Not only will there just not be any food, the land will be destroyed. Verse 31, so the abundance will be unknown in the land because of the subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. And like I said, it's like Joseph can't use enough adjectives to describe how bad it's going to be. The famine is going to be so bad that the years of plenty will be forgotten. In fact, no one will realize how good they had it until it's gone. I thought, sounds like today, huh? And then, to emphasize the urgency of the matter, Joseph adds, now as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. I mean, there's no changing this. This is going to happen. Notice how many times Joseph defers to God. First of all, verse 16, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Verse 25, God has told to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Verse 28, God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. And then here in verse 32, the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it to pass. Now this, I just want to throw this out. God, your translation may say shortly bring it about. That quickly, shortly is like in Revelation 1:1 where it says these things will happen shortly or these things will happen quickly. The word doesn't mean quickly as in, in a few hours. It means quickly as in once it starts, it's not going to stop. It will happen quickly. And the same way with this, but this famine the plenty is going to start right away, and then the famine will fall on that. So think about Pharaoh at this. I mean, what's going through his mind? What do you think he's thinking as he's hearing all this?
There's gotta be some doubt.
Could be, but them dreams are pretty vivid.
What do we do?
Yeah, what do we do?
Well, the next verse, he starts planning.
Yeah, immediately he starts planning. But what I was thinking about, what's going through his mind, he's the leader of the country. What's got to be going through his mind is, will there be a revolt? Will the people blame me for it? How can I get out in front of this thing?
The buck stops at the
Yeah,
top there,
exactly. And when there's famine, you don't want it stopping there. It's a historical fact. There's been, I didn't look this up so I could get the details. I just know the surface of this. But there have been many Chinese dynasties, through history. Every single one of them changed because of famines. When the family dynasty in charge, when there was a famine and they could not feed the people, there was a revolt. Or as one man I know of puts it this way, he says, if the people have nothing to lose, they lose it. And they revolt. But before Pharaoh can say a word, Joseph continues with advice. Verse 33, and he said, it's almost like Joseph, we've stopped and discussed this, but as Joseph said, this is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. And it's just like he takes a breath and goes on. And now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact a fifth, 20%, of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. So I had a question about this. How'd they get that fifth of the produce, or the 20%? Would the saying that Pharaoh is, quote, the government, or those in charge, would the government just take 20% of the crops that the people raised?
Like a tax or something?
Like a tax? This is as I'm reading it through I'm like, how did they do that? How did they get that from the people to start with? And then I read, one commentary said that tithing was actually practiced by Egyptians and other nations as a form of taxes or tribute. So they were already giving 10% of what they raised, kind of like an income tax or flat tax maybe. And so this 20% would be a double tithe. But here's the thing. Let me add this first. Other commentaries indicated that the produce was bought from the people, that the, quote, government actually purchased this much from the people to put it up. But the thing of it was, there was going to be so much excess, so much abundance, that the people wouldn't mind. When you got 40 jillion zucchinis, you don't care to give everybody in the neighborhood one. But if you only had one, you might want to put it up and save it. So that's the idea here. There's going to be so much of it that they're not going to mind giving a double tithe or a double
Well,
amount.
it's kind of like, since the Pharaoh's responsible for their well-being anyway,
Yeah.
it's almost like putting a portion of their crops into safekeeping.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it doesn't say this, but you've got to, again, look between the words, look behind what's going on. They built those storehouses in various cities close to the people. And so the question would have to come up, well, why are you building that? What's that for? And once it was explained to them, then yeah, they would be willing to do it again, because there's so much of it. They're naturally maybe glad to get rid of it rather than see it go to waste.
It didn't seem to me like 20% would be enough to carry them for 7 years of famine.
But if it was an overabundance.
But if it's a huge, I mean, we're talking a huge amount of food. 20.
They almost needed additional storage to put it in.
Yeah. Well, as we'll see in a moment, there was so much of it they quit counting it.
Yeah.
So it was just a huge amount. So then the excess would probably been wasted because there's so much of it if they didn't do this. I mean, there's only so much of it you can eat at one time. So then Joseph goes on, verses 35 and 36. He goes on and says, then let them get this person that you've appointed over this and exact this amount. Let them gather all the food of all the good years that are coming and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority and let them guard it. And let the food become as a reserve for the land for 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish during the famine. So let me ask you this. Do you think Joseph was bucking for this job?
I just think he had the wisdom to do the job.
Oh, he did have the wisdom to do the job.
I don't know about bucking.
You think he was?
I think he did because nobody went to bat for him before they offered on him. His
Yeah.
brother sold him. He was left to die, and then he's accused of raping Potiphar's wife, and he was thrown into prison, and I mean on and on and on. Nobody listens to him, and whether he tried to convince
Yep.
somebody of his innocence. I mean, at this point, I feel like he's got to stand up for himself.
Well, and he did have the gift of dreams from way back.
Yep.
From when he was younger, he had the
Yep.
gift of the dreams.
Yep. Who else votes with Amy?
I just thought his wisdom, he was telling him what he needed, and I didn't get the impression that he was giving him like, look at me,
Look at me, yeah.
I didn't see that either.
That's the. I mean, it could be either way, but I never thought that he was. I think I've always thought that he answered the dreams, he interpreted the dreams, and then he went on to say, "And this is what you're going to need to make this happen." I don't think he was looking for the job, but like you say, after all he's been through, maybe he did.
But look what he would have on his shoulders. He'd wind up back in the dungeon.
Yeah, if he didn't do it right,
Yeah,
exactly.
If he didn't do it right.
So I think he was just sharing what he had learned from the years of service in Potiphar's house, and then what he'd learned in the prison. And my opinion is, I also think that he was still speaking from God's direction. But at any rate, at either way, look at what Pharaoh did, 37 through 44. I may get you all out early tonight. Now, the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. All the other servants are standing around going, yeah, man, that's a good idea. Let's do that. Let's do it. Especially if he's going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Let him do it. So then Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this? And he's indicating Joseph now, in whom is the Spirit of God, or a divine spirit. Of course, again, Pharaoh doesn't know Joseph's God, but he sees in whom is the Spirit of God. So Pharaoh then said to Joseph, since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. I mean, God told you all this. You must be the one he wants to do this. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only that your translation may word that different. In verse 40, only in the throne I will be greater than you. That word "do homage" is there a difference?
Obey your command.
Obey your command.
Submit to your orders.
Submit to your orders. That's good. The word literally has something to do with the mouth. And so the picture is, remember, Hebrew is a language of pictures. The picture is, it's like hanging on to every word. They'll hang on to every word that you tell them. They'll do anything you tell them to do. And verse 41, then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put the gold necklace around his neck. And he had him ride in his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, bow the knee, or make way. And he set him over all the land of Egypt. And moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission, no one shall raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. No one will make a move on this without your say-so. So either Pharaoh really trusted him, or Pharaoh wanted to make sure he wasn't blamed for anything. I'm not sure exactly what that was. But notice this, just a side note here. It's interesting that every major change in Joseph's life involves clothes. Did you notice that? Chapter 37, verse 3, he got a new coat. Made everybody mad. Chapter 37, verse 23, the new coat was stripped off of him and he was sold. Chapter 39, verse 12, his cloak was stripped off of him and used as false evidence, and he was thrown in prison. Chapter 41, verse 14, he got a shave and a haircut and new clothes, and he gets to meet Pharaoh. And now in verse 42, he gets garments of fine linen, and he's placed in second in command in all of Egypt. And they say clothes don't make the man. So it's like every time you think about Joseph, he's getting new clothes. But even with all this, Joseph is still not an Egyptian. Remember back in chapter, let's see, what was it? Chapter 39, how much emphasis was put on the fact that Potiphar was an Egyptian, an officer of the guard, an Egyptian. 3 different times we're told he was an Egyptian, and Joseph is not an Egyptian. But Pharaoh took care of that. He gave Joseph an Egyptian name and a wife. Verse 45, then Pharaoh named Joseph Zephanath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as his wife. And then it says, Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. So, wow, all this stuff and a wife too. And just think, this morning, when Joseph got up this morning, he was in prison. No clue of what the day was going to bring. I mean, I find that fascinating. He was in prison. He was completely unknown to Pharaoh. He had no thought of ever getting out. What a difference a day makes, or actually just a few hours. I mean, this is the sort of thing we see happen in movies. But God. And as I couldn't help but as I was reading this, I wondered what Potiphar's wife thought about all this. Just got you back on that. And what was going through Joseph's mind? Notice Joseph doesn't say a word as Pharaoh's rattling off all this stuff he's going to do. Perhaps Joseph was so dumbfounded that he was speechless. But he knew that God had led him this far, and so God would carry him through. As we said, all this happened in just a few hours. And the next few verses 46 through 49, though, encompass those 7 years of plenty. Verse 46 says, now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land. Just say, let me see if I... Okay. If you notice there in verse 45, it says Joseph went forth over the land. That's like it's just a survey. And then in verse 46, he went through all the land. He didn't just go from the big cities. He went through all the land in detail. And in verse 47, and during the 7 years of plenty, the land brought forth abundantly. That word there, abundantly, the word literally is brought forth by handfuls. And what that is a picture of, it's a picture of the earth lifting up the crops by handfuls, just on and on and on. So he, Joseph, gathered all the food of these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt and placed the food in the cities. He placed in every city the food from its own surrounding fields. Then Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. It was more than they could count. There was so much of it, they quit counting. It must have seemed like it would never end. And then in verse 50, we get this bit of personal information about Joseph. Now, before the year of famine came, now this is still within the 7 years, the 7 years of plenty. At this point here, Joseph is somewhere around 35 years old. He was 30, we saw, when Pharaoh elevated him, and that was just before the famine begins. Now, to connect this to what we've read before, just remember that probably, meanwhile, back in Canaan, this is just about the time that Tamar is pregnant with twins. So you can keep the stories together so you know what's going on in the other place, all simultaneously at the two places. And then verses 50 through 52. Before the year of the famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. And Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and my father's household. And he named the second Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Now, it wasn't that by naming that first child Manasseh that he forgot about everything he'd ever been through. It's just amnesia. Slate wiped clean, don't even think about it again. It wasn't that Joseph completely forgot about his suffering, as in never to remember it again, but for the pain, while likely not completely forgotten, but the sting of it was gone. I mean, we can all probably remember things that were very painful. But the sting of it is gone. My mother-in-law, her famous saying was always that having a child was the worst pain you would never remember. So, it just for the joy. I've said that before, and Sandy usually says, I remember it. So, but what Imogene was getting at was for the joy of the child that you have. It doesn't control your life. Joseph, for where God had placed him now, he didn't forget what he'd been through, but it didn't hurt him anymore. And Ephraim, if you notice, Ephraim, you spell it, the I am on the end of his name. Anytime you see I am on the end of something, it's like we would add an S. It makes it plural. Like cherub and cherubim, seraph and seraphim. Ephraim, it's a plural. The word literally means double fruit. And this will come up again in a later chapter 2. Then in verses 53 through 56, when the 7 years of plenty had been in the land of Egypt, which had been in the land of Egypt, came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come. It wasn't as bad as it was going to be that first year, but it would continue to get worse. But it began to come. Joseph had said, then there was famine in all the lands. But for that time in the land of Egypt, there was bread, just as the famine began to come. But, verse 55, when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And what did Pharaoh say? Go see Joseph. Don't you know he's glad he met Joseph at that time? Go see Joseph, and whatever he says to you, you shall do. 56. And when the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. So this bothered me.
He's selling back to them their own.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. And I thought, there's got to be more to that than the surface reading. Because it doesn't sound right. I mean, I can understand selling it to the people of the other lands. But these Egyptians had raised these crops. But if it had been purchased from them, if they had been paid for it, then you could understand it being sold back to them. Because it was a transaction on both parts. You know, if it was taxed, and you know, if they had no choice but to give it, then I have a problem with selling it back to
If
them.
they had no means to store it, then they were basically paying for it to be stored.
Yeah, that may exactly be what it was. They were paying the storage fee, as we might say.
Get places to store things that are so cherishable we can't get rid of them. You know, but we have no place to put them either.
Yeah. Or you pay somebody to keep something for you, take care. Like if you board animals because you can't take care of them, but you wouldn't sell it back to you. That's not a good example at all. But anyway, so it just bothered me. But this of paying the storage fee makes more sense. But plus there was such an abundance of it that I'm sure that, and this is another thing that bothered me, there was such an abundance of it when they had it, I'm sure they didn't get paid a whole lot for it because there's so much of it.
But we don't want to see that halo removed from
I know it. That's
Joseph's
a problem
hand.
I've got there. Wait till we get over what's it, chapter 48 or 9 or something. I'm like
47.
They have to give up their land. We'll deal with that when we get there. Maybe I'll find something on it there. I could not find anything on this. But one thing, one commentary barely touched on it. Henry Morris said that if Joseph had given it to them, there would have been a greater chance of waste. When something doesn't cost you anything, there is little value placed on it.
Makes people squabble too.
Yeah.
You got good more.
Yeah, he got more than I did, or he got the good stuff. I got stuff that was
I got
down
5
under.
kids. He's just got 3 or whatever.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, I don't know. Or maybe it was sold to him on a sliding scale. You know, those who could afford to pay more paid more. I don't know. I don't have an answer for this, and it bothered me. So if you come across anything on it, I'd be glad to know. Because I just, especially when we get over that other chapter, that really bothers me. But there's got to be a reason. There's got to be a reason. But just think about this. The mere 20% of the produce for 7 years was enough to feed all these people plus enough to sell. I mean, you talk about exceedingly abundantly above. That's a lot of stuff. So finally then, verse 57, and the people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe in all the earth. The famine hit Egypt. The famine in Egypt hit all the lands around Egypt as well. Thing was, they didn't know it was coming. Nobody but the Egyptians knew it was coming. Those in the surrounding areas couldn't prepare. But it soon became known that not only did Egypt have food, they had enough to sell. And so people began coming out of the woodwork. They came from everywhere. And I have to wonder at that moment, at that point, did Joseph expect his brothers to come? Or is that a complete surprise? We'll get to that in the next chapter. But I don't know. I have to wonder if it crossed his mind. Or maybe he thought, no, that's too good to be true. But I don't know.
Maybe he thought they had died. He didn't know.
He didn't know. He didn't know if any of them were left.
Well, that's what that's my question. During all this time, how did he keep from going to see his father and his little brother?
Going to see if they were still alive. Yeah. I mean, that came up in some of the commentaries, and we really don't know other than, maybe he intended to, but you know how life is. Yeah. We'll go next summer, or
He was in jail a lot.
Yeah, well, he was. He was in jail a lot. And he had that wife now and 2 little boys, so.
All this 7 years, though, he was large and in charge.
Yeah. Yes, he was. So it looks like he could have gotten away anytime he wanted to. But or maybe, had his own chariot and everything.
He
so.
still had very fond memories of that dungeon and being in jail.
And maybe he knew they were going to come to him.
Maybe he knew, or maybe he was afraid to leave, afraid he would get thrown in jail.
That's what I was thinking.
Let's just stay with it like it is. Just keep things smooth.
Just keep the course.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, my daddy.
Right. But here we go. Before I get to the application on it, any other comments or thoughts on this? I mean, it's just very straightforward. There wasn't a whole lot I could say about it other than adding in a few details here and there.
I don't know where I read it, and it could have been in a novel, but the cows, you can't really envision a cow coming up out of the Nile, that these cows were actually hippopotamus, and they're down under the water. And when they come up out of the Nile, you can kind of envision something.
Well, that's a thought. I hadn't thought about that.
Well, I read it somewhere. I couldn't tell you where,
but because you said that, when we read 7 cows, sleek and fat, we think in pictures. I have a picture of what I think they look like. What kind of cows do you think they are?
Black and white.
Huh? Black and white. Huh?
Jersey.
Okay. Jerseys are more brown, black and white. I have this
Reddish color.
reddish. They're Angus or whatever. Red Angus.
Because it's
Holsteins.
sleek and shiny.
Yep.
Do they call hippopotamuses cows though?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that they eat them, though.
Neither.
That's
Like I
interesting.
said, this has been a while back, but I just keep seeing that visional effect in my mind that somewhere I read the cows, the hippopotamus are called cows, or were called cows back then. And
Well, that's interesting. I'll have to do some more looking into that. Calls for more talk.
And
So
I would think that food that would be edible food.
I don't know.
well, they could have just lived in the Nile just like a wild animal or something,
Yeah, but it had to connect to food
Yeah,
because that was the meat and the bread.
yeah.
So I don't know, but I think of black and white ones too. That's what mine are. So
Chocolate on the white color.
yeah, there you go. So okay, but back to Egypt. This is where I think the story hits a little closer to home. One commentary said, when one has grown used to certain high standard of living, he considers anything less a severe imposition. And then he added, even though most people in the world have lived with less all their lives. So the one of the a question that I had as I began writing your lessons before I actually did any in-depth studying was, if the grains could be preserved in the storehouses, and that's how they kept them for 7 years, and then doled them out over the next 7 years. So we're talking some of this grain kept for maybe 14 years. The first 7 and then the second 7. If the grains could be preserved in the storehouses, why didn't individual families put up some? I mean, I'm always thinking gardening and canning and all. There have been years that, in our own lives and also in my growing up when one particular vegetable would just produce, you just had so much of it you couldn't give it away. Mother would can it all. And I'd say, don't we have enough of that? Well, we never know if we'll have any next year.
This is their main food source, though.
Yeah.
Isn't it? I mean, it's not like they had stocked refrigerators and canned goods
Yeah.
and all this like we do. This was their main food source.
Yeah. But when there was such an abundance, why? And I was thinking back about those in Haran or in Hebron as well. Did they not? I mean, we know that they had winners. Did they not put back to get through hard times?
Surely.
Surely they did.
I would think they did, but not to have enough for 7 years, maybe one.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be difficult to have that much put back.
They totally depended on the earth and the rain and probably enough. They just
For 1 year.
Yeah.
one
For 1 year.
season to another.
Yeah. And when you think about Joe's reading this book now, I've read it years ago, The Light and the Glory, and it's about the early years of American history from a Christian viewpoint. And it talks about those early settlers and how it came down to where they had to save. They couldn't eat all that they had because they had to save it for seed to be able to plant. And, we save seed, just because you don't have to buy it then if you save it. It's the way we look at it. But you think about them, they had to save that back, had to have that in order to produce for the next year. But I just wondered about that. Did any of them even think about putting back and saving for themselves? Or in Egypt's case, were they just depending on, Joseph's taking care of it?
They were awful dependent on the leadership.
Yeah, they really were, and that can be dangerous. So I think that takes us into our application. So how is that like today? I'm sure things were good for those 7 years. Things were so good those 7 years, they couldn't even believe that it was going to stop. Until it did. There was always going to be food. Until there wasn't. I'm sure, today, I fully believe that a famine is coming again. And we already are seeing gas prices go through the roof. Diesel prices, which transports the food from here to there. What are we doing to prepare for the day when we can't go and do like we always did? Or everything is not readily available like it always was. I just think, as I studied this lesson, I just thought that this lesson is so important for today that we need to be prepared. So, anything else?
A lot of thoughts.
Lot of thoughts.
To think of, for sure.
Well, in these next chapters, a lot of it is like this. There's just really not a whole lot I can do with it other than just tell it like it is.
But it's really a fascinating time, really.
Yeah. Well, when you make yourself read it closely and not just, I just remember the story. And focus in on some of these things and actually ask questions about whether we find the answers to it or not. But that just bothers me that Joseph is going to sell that back to them. So, anything else?
It's pretty fascinating in chapter 47 too.
Yeah.
About all of this. So that really gets it in.
Yeah, that just, I'm like, it's like we said, I don't want to take his halo off, you know,
No.
I like Joseph, so.
It's pretty amazing.
Well, you know, some of the commentaries, I was reading some stuff today and I thought, that's a bit of a stretch. It's talking about comparing Joseph to Jesus. I told you that J. Vernon McGee's got this whole big list of comparing Joseph to Jesus. But the one that I looked at today was not J. Vernon McGee. I forget who it was. But they said, just like Jesus, after his crucifixion, when he went into Hades and he preached to the saints in prison, that Joseph preached to the two. And I'm like, I don't think so. That's a totally different thing. The more I read these commentaries, the more I begin to see that they're just human beings like the rest of us.
Joseph definitely was an example of walking by faith, though.
Yeah, and waiting on God.
Yeah.
But most cases he didn't have a choice but to wait.
Mm-hmm.
But what was his attitude while he was waiting? That's the key right there.
Well, that's why he has a halo.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I read something about if you can be trusted in doing small things, then you are looked at where you can really be trusted in doing big things.
Yeah,
If you stay faithful in doing the little things,
Yeah.
the grunge work.
Yeah, exactly.
And I thought it was odd they didn't talk more about his wife. I mean, it was just like your daughter of so-and-so.
And I wanted it to say, and Joseph said, nah. I'd rather
Well,
have somebody else.
And it was an Egyptian wife.
It was an Egyptian wife, but the sons had Hebrew names. I meant to bring that out. The sons had Hebrew names. Ruth, both those sons had Moabite names, didn't they? I think both of their sons had Moabite names, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm talking about Naomi and the two sons.
Mahlon and Chilion.
Yeah,
I don't know.
she owes it because she's been teaching Ruth. That's what I was saying.
They already had them before they moved over to Moab, though.
Yeah, that's right.
So I don't think they're Moabite names.
Okay. Well, in a lot of cases, they will give them names of the surrounding people, but in this case, he gave them Hebrew names, and so most scholars believe, well, as we know that he's blessed by Jacob, the sons are, and so the thought is that she converted and followed that faith. So we don't have the detail on that.
I thought that the father named the first and then the mother named the kids after that.
No, that's what happened with Judah, but that wasn't the way it was supposed to be.
Oh.
The father was supposed to name them all, but Judah was giving in to the custom of the Canaanites when he allowed her to name the other two. So, all right, well, let's pray. Father, it's exciting to read this. And to know that this really happened. This is not fairy tale.